Welcome to the Dr. Warren Gage podcast, and we're continuing our exposition of Revelation 21 and 22, the part of John's vision that describes the new heavens and new earth. And so we have come actually to verse 8, but I've got a couple of comments that I want to make in a recap. We'd finished through verse 8. I want to make a couple of comments in a recap, if I might. He says in verse 7, "He who overcomes shall have this inheritance, and I will be his God, and he will be my son." He's talking about those who overcome, picks up the language of the two chapters at the beginning of Revelation that describe the seven churches. We remember that Christ dictated letters to the angels, or probably the pastors of the seven churches of Western Roman Asia, which is Western Turkey today. And so I want to show how that's important in us understanding this particular part of Revelation. So he says, "He who overcomes shall have this inheritance." That is, he's going to have a part in the New Jerusalem, which is in contrast to those who are outside of the New Jerusalem. There is, as we've said, there is a Gehenna district in the new heavens and the new earth. How that looks, I don't know, but it was outside of the wall of the old Jerusalem. Today it's outside of the dung gate, and that's where all of the trash and the offal was brought outside of the city, and it was perpetually burned. It was like a city dump outside of the city of Jerusalem in the Gehenna Valley, which runs south of the city. And so he says, "But as for the cowardly," that is, and then he gives a list of the characteristics of those who will find themselves in this lamentable condition for all of time. "But as for the cowardly, the faithless, and the abominable, as for murderers, and fornicators, and sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their lot shall be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." This description makes impossible two doctrines that have been invented by those that have sensibilities that can't comprehend how there could be eternal punishment. And those doctrines are annihilationism and universalism. I want to speak to those briefly. There is not an eternal destiny for the angels that did not keep their first estate. The creatures that God made in the beginning, and God can only create that which is holy and perfect. But there is a capacity, possibility for sin. And the angels that disobeyed, Paul calls the angels that kept their first estate the elect angels. And that term will be applied to humanity as well. There is an elect of God from the very beginning to the very end who have been elected by God for salvation. I don't know any other way to construe that language or that concept. But those that are not elect, that have chosen this lifestyle of unbelief, like the angels fell. And the idea that there is a division among the angels, another created order, nobody talks about a universalism with respect to the angels. Some are saved and some are not. And the difference is, for the angels, there was no plan of salvation. For the human family, however, all of us who were in Adam and Eve, and who fell in Adam and Eve, and then ratified that sinful choice by our own sin, there is a plan of salvation, namely, that's calling out to Christ for salvation. It's very simple. All those who turn to him will be saved. Turn to him in faith. There was no corresponding plan with respect to the angels. Now, the idea that these sins, the patterns of these sins, the perpetrators of them without faith, continue into the new heavens and the new earth makes impossible, as I read it, any kind of sense that there is a universal salvation. I don't know how to reconcile that idea as much as we might long for such a thing. There is no biblical warrant, in my opinion, to come to such a conclusion. The other thing that it makes impossible, to my mind, in any case, is the doctrine of annihilationism, that at the end of our lifetime, if we have not turned to Christ in salvation, we will cease to be. We will no longer exist in some sense. And so that is an accommodation to the idea of trying to do away with eternal punishment. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. It's certainly not the way that Christ describes it when he talks about where the fire is not quenched and the worm does not die. There is some sense of punishment and corruption that continues on forever. So I don't know what to do with that. That's not an idea that's new to the Bible. The Romans had the idea of the Sibyl. The Greeks actually had the idea of the Sibyl, who had offended the god Apollo, and he had promised her that she would never die. But when she offended him, he corresponded that with a secondary punishment. She could never die. He had already said that. He can't change his mind, so she will live eternally. But the process of aging, Apollo said, would never cease. So she always grows older, but she grows more enfeebled by age and uglier in her countenance and appearance. And that idea goes on forever. So it's a terrifying idea, a terrifying prospect. But this idea is not unique to the New Testament. Anyway, so they have they will have a place in the lake of fire and brimstone that burns. And he said, this is the second death. Now, the second death is significant, and that comes from the letter to Smyrna at the beginning of Revelation, and I want to look at that. This is the church that Christ writes to, that is appointed to suffer. And let's see, that's in the second chapter, I believe. I can find it here. Smyrna, verse 8, and to the angel of the church in Smyrna write the words of the first and the last who died and who came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, unlike Laodicea that is rich but poor. And the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. The church was persecuted early on by the synagogue. And so that's what he's talking about, are the unbelieving, Christ-rejecting Jews that persecuted the church. Do not fear what you are about to suffer, the Lord says. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. This is interesting because chiastically it relates to those very disputed verses in chapter 20, where Satan is cast into prison for 1,000 years. Here the believers are going to be cast into a prison for 10 days of tribulation. I don't know anyone that takes that literally. We don't have anything literal to apply that to. It's just a period of testing that is limited. They go through it knowing that it will end after a certain period of time. I think the same thing is true of the 1,000 years in Revelation 20. The 1,000-year imprisonment is to disable the enemy from hindering the gospel. He will no longer be able to deceive the nations, and so the gospel will go free. So anyway, I think that's a footnote, but I think it's a significant one. He says to the church at Smyrna, be faithful unto death. I mean, he's not promising them deliverance from temporal death. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. What does that mean? He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the church, to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. And that begins to give us the idea of what is at stake here. There is a threat typically, not with Smyrna, because they are a suffering, believing church. With most of them, there's a threat. He begins by talking to the church about something that he finds deficient. Remember, the overall context is a retelling of the Battle of Jericho, and Joshua had to make the people ready for holy war against Jericho. And in doing that, he had the men circumcised so that they could participate in Passover, a covenant sign that Moses neglected, both in his own family and also with the family of God during the time in the wilderness outside of Egypt. So it says here, he who overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death, and that's relevant to our passage. In other words, the one who overcomes, who endures the tribulation and is faithful through the first death, will be delivered from the second death. And so the second death is what he has just described. It's that torment that comes to those who are cowardly and faithless and abominable and murderers, fornicators, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars. Those are the characteristic sins of unbelief, and so they will not be spared from the second death. I think to show this pattern, I think it would be helpful to look at it. I discussed it in my dissertation, and I pulled this off the shelf. The title of the section is The Relationship of the Seven Churches in 2:1 to 3 to 22 to the vision of the whore and the bride in Revelation 17:1 through 22:6. And what we find is there is a bridal destiny promised to those in these seven cities that overcome. So we know what overcoming means. Like, for example, to the church of Ephesus, he says, I will give him to eat of the tree of life, to the one who overcomes. And then that is fulfilled in 2:7, is fulfilled in 22:2. In the midst of it, that is the New Jerusalem street, is the tree of life. Christ says that at the beginning of Revelation as well, to the one who overcomes, they will be given to eat of the tree of life, which was forbidden to Adam and Eve, as we recall. Smyrna, the second city, in 2:11, he shall not be hurt by the second death. Chapter 20, verse 6, but the one we also looked at in 21, on these the second death has no power. They will be delivered from the second death. To the church at Pergamos, Christ promises to the one who overcomes, I will give him a stone, and on the stone a new name that is written. It's related to the promise to Peter. The Petrine promise that is at the beginning of John, which Jesus promises to Peter, is that he will be given, he will be made a stone, and the Aramaic word for that is Cephas, which becomes in Greek Petros, but Cephas is the word that's used there. It's the Aramaic form of rock. Here, the word stone is Cephas. It's a stone that's used of election. A white or a black stone is typically what that involves, and they would use those in voting. It says here, I will give him a stone, and on the stone a new name is written. And then in 21:14 and 19, we're told the city has 12 foundations, and on them the names of the 12 apostles, and the foundation was of every precious stone. So the promise to the Pergamos people who are faithful is that they will be in the city with a new name. And not the promise is greater than the fulfillment is greater than the promise. It's not just any stone, a common ordinary stone. It's a precious jewel. So that's a principle of God's promises are always far greater in their fulfillment than in the statement of them merely. In Thyatira, he says, to the one who overcomes, I will give authority over the nations, and he will shepherd them, that is the Lord, with a rod of iron, the scepter of David, and I will give the morning star. Then the promise of that is in Revelation 19:15 and 22:16. He strikes the nations, he himself will shepherd them with a rod of iron. I am the bright and morning star. The promise to the church at Sardis, the one who overcomes will be clothed in white, and his name will be in the book of life. The book of life is found in the heavenly city in 1914 and 2012. The armies of heaven dressed in fine white linen and another book was opened, the book of life. So we can see that there's a pattern here, that what is held out as a promise to those to encourage their perseverance and overcoming to the churches of Asia is fulfilled when we come to the description of the New Jerusalem. The church of Philadelphia, I've set before you an open door that no one can shut, which I take it to be the grave and the tomb. I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and the name, my city of the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from God, shall be on him. The fulfillment of that is Revelation 21:2, 22, and 25, the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, the Lord God Almighty in its temple, and its Lamb, and its gates shall not be shut. So there you are. Laodicea, to the one who overcomes, he says, I will give to sit with me on my throne and on his throne. And Revelation 22:3, and the throne of God and the Lamb shall be in the New Jerusalem. So the promises to those who overcome are being described in the two chapters that describe the new heavens and the new earth. But then there is a secondary pattern for those who do not overcome. Their destiny will be found in earlier chapters, in the chapters that describe the whore, Babylon, that is to be destroyed. To the Ephesians he said, repent, but if not, I will remove your lampstand. That is, they will dwell in darkness. And in chapter 18, verse 23, and the light of a lamp shall not shine in you, Babylon, any longer. So that the whole city of the New Jerusalem is a sound and light show. It's filled with light. But to those who do not overcome is the threat that their lampstand will be removed and they will dwell in darkness. To the church of Smyrna, the devil is about to throw some of you in prison, and you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful until death, and I will give you a crown. You shall not be hurt by the second death. In Revelation 20, verses 2-7, and he laid hold of the devil and bound him for 1,000 years. And those who had been beheaded lived and reigned with Christ over such the second death has no power. Satan will be released then from his prison at the appointed time. To the church of Pergamum, to those who do not overcome, he says, Antipas, my faithful martyr, who was killed among you, you have there some holding the teaching of Balaam so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols. And then the threat that's fulfilled, Revelation 17:6 and 19:20, the woman, Babylon, was drunk with the blood of the martyrs, the false prophet who had performed signs of deceit to make them worship the beast. So they will dwell in the company of the false prophet. To Thyatira, the most threatening, the central letter, and the one that's most significant, that speaks about the whore. And I should comment here that the whore that's spoken of in the letter to Thyatira, the woman Jezebel, and the false prophet that it finds himself in Pergamos, are not external threats to the church. They are internal threats to the church. I think that's very significant. It's very often missed. We tend to think of the enemies as being outside the camp. But as the disciples learned, there was a devil amongst them. Jesus had said, have I not chosen you the 12, and one of you is a devil? And that choice went to the devil. He knowingly chose him who was to be the traitor. Anyway, Thyatira, you permit that woman Jezebel to deceive my servants into committing fornication and to eat things sacrificed to idols, that is, abominations. I'm throwing into a bed those who commit adultery with her. I will give to each one of you according to your works. And then the threat that's fulfilled in Revelation 17:4 and 18:6 and 9, the woman, Babylon, had a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. Repay her according to her works, those committing fornication with her. The church of Sardis, repent, or you will not know in what hour I will come upon you. Revelation 18:10, the fulfillment of that. Woe to you, the great city, Babylon, for in 1 hour your judgment has come, not an hour that was expected. To the church of Philadelphia, the promise is, I will make them come, the false Jews of Satan's synagogue, to know that I have loved you. He will provoke the people of Israel to jealousy, is the idea. I think Paul picks up on that very clearly. Revelation 20, verse 9, they, Satan and those he deceives, went up and surrounded the beloved city, and fire came down from heaven and God and devoured them. In Laodicea, the church that says, I am rich and have need of nothing, you do not know that you are naked. Buy from me refined gold and white garments. And the fulfillment of those who do not do that, he says in 17:4, 16, and 18:7, the woman Babylon was arrayed in scarlet and adorned with gold. Yet these will make her naked. In her heart, she says, I sit as a queen. I will not see sorrow. So these passages are very carefully woven together to make these points, and for us to understand there is a penalty for not crying out to God for salvation. God has made it so easy. All we have to do is recognize our sin and cry out for salvation. That recognition of sin is the thirst by which we ask for living water. And all of us, everyone, is invited to the wedding. But there will be those who will not receive that invitation, and their portion then will be to be among the company of those who will find no salvation in the last day. Thank you for listening. Please be sure to like and subscribe to my channel if this has been useful to you or intriguing. To learn more, you can visit my webpage, drwarrengage.com, or find me on my Patreon account, patreon.com/Dr. Warren Gage. I hope you'll join me next time on the Dr. Warren Gage podcast. Thank you.